Welcome. If you like stories about magic, mayhem, and murder, this video's for you. I'm Dahlia Jane. This is Ember. When I'm not exploring the mysteries of the universe through astrology, I'm usually reading something that would make a stranger sitting next to me change seats on the bus. There he goes. Did I miss posting an April reading wrap-up? Yes, I did. And I don't want to talk about it. Never mind. April 2026 was a fine reading month. But May was extraordinary. I read 12 books in May, 10 novels, and 2 biographies. And of those 12 books, 3 were 5-star reads. I know. I don't believe it either. I am notoriously stingy about my 5-star ratings. For context, from January through April, I only had 1 5-star read total. I like to pile my stars up in a cave, sit on my hoard like a dragon, incinerating any book that dares approach. But once in a while, a book is just so good that it sneaks past my defenses and I have no choice but to award it that elusive 5 stars. Somehow this month, I encountered 3 of them. And you know what's wild? They were all debut novels. These books were so masterful, I just can't believe they were debuts. So let's get into it. Now, this was absolutely an outstanding reading month overall. But unfortunately, it got off to a rough start. I don't enjoy talking about my reading fails, but I consider it a public service to prevent you from repeating my mistakes. The beginning of May, I had a brutal cross-country travel day involving planes, buses, and automobiles. Because I'm prone to motion sickness, I wanted an audiobook to keep me company throughout the trip. So I was looking for something twisty and fast-paced enough to hold my attention. And I'd seen good reviews of the thriller You Are Not Alone by Sarah Pekkanen and Greer Hendricks. Released in 2020, You Are Not Alone follows Shay, a woman whose life is just not going according to plan. She's temping while she hunts for something more stable, and she is constantly avoiding her apartment because she has a big crush on her roommate, but his serious girlfriend is suddenly at their place all the time, and she's sick of feeling like a third wheel. Relatable. So one morning after fleeing her apartment, Shay witnesses a stranger throw herself in front of an oncoming subway train. And traumatized by the gruesome scene, as I think any of us would be, Shay starts obsessing over who this woman was and why she did what she did. Shay decides to attend her memorial service to try to get some closure. And while she's there, she meets the charismatic sisters, Jane and Cassandra Moore. Jane and Cassandra seem to have everything Shay wants. Great careers, effortless style, and a circle of close female friends. And to her surprise, they're interested in Shay too. Maybe too interested. Shay's so lonely and starved of intimacy and hope that she jumps at the chance to become part of the very friendship group that may have driven the subway train victim to end her own life. When I read the synopsis for this book, I was so excited because if there's one thing I can't resist, it's stories about weird and manipulative female friendships. So many thrillers are about couples and couple drama, but good friends have just as much access to hurt you and even ruin your life. From the beginning of this book, I liked Shay. She felt beaten down by disappointments and way too awkward for her own good, but in a real and relatable way. But even though I liked her, she was way too nerdy and self-conscious to be befriended by women who sounded like they stepped out of an issue of Vogue magazine. So from the jump, you know Jane and Cassandra could only be interested in her for sinister reasons. And I buckled in for those reasons to be very, very sinister indeed. Fortunately, this is where the book started losing me. You'd think a group of female friends toxic enough to drive a woman to throw herself in front of a train must be engaged in extreme, manipulative, and culty tactics. This entire plot hinges on believing that these women had enough influence over the victim to compel her to take her own life. But the book never convinces me that they did. I kept thinking, why not go to the police? Disappear, or expose them in some other way, and the book never answers those questions. The way the story escalated, it just didn't feel convincing. What these women were ultimately up to also wasn't that deep or interesting. I think there were 2 choices here. The authors could have gone all in, made the group 100 times more dangerous and sadistic. They could have turned the camp up to 11 and made this thriller into a fun and soapy read where you couldn't even catch your own breath and say, wait a second, does this actually make sense? Or they could have toned it down and made it more believable and therefore more compelling. but this middle ground where they chose that the characters are acting in very extreme and unbelievable ways, but then nothing all that exceptional or interesting is actually going on beneath all of it, just didn't work for me at all. And I'm not going to give anything away, don't worry, but after one of the main reveals at the end, this is a moment designed to make you gasp with surprise. I stopped and said, yeah, so? What's the opposite of chills? This did nothing for me. Now, granted, I'm famously an overthinker. I have a very hard time shutting my brain off when characters in thrillers are acting in unbelievable ways to advance the plot. The majority of reviewers actually really liked this thriller. Even though lots of them do agree it's far-fetched, they're fine going along with it. So if you're not an overthinker and you just want to read a tense and twisty story about a sinister group of women, you might have a lot of fun with this one too. But I only stuck with the book because I was in a situation where I was a captive audience. And as I got further into it, I kept increasing the narration speed so that I would get to the end more quickly. I had that thing on like 2.5 speed. I gave You Are Not Alone 2 stars. Now, if you have any recommendations for more thrilling thriller audiobooks that I should consider listening to the next time I have a big trip, please let me know in the comments. My first read of May 2026 was a frustrating thriller. Most sensible people would have taken that as a sign to try something else. Not me. I doubled down, and I immediately picked up another thriller. This one was Darkrooms. It's a debut novel by Rebecca Hannigan, and it was released in January 2026. For 20 years, inhabitants of the fictional town of Banakilduff in Ireland have been trying to forget the summer solstice day when 2 seemingly unrelated tragedies occurred. 9-year-old Roisin O'Halloran disappears after she was seen entering the Hanging Woods, and a highly respected townsperson became permanently disabled when he was hit by a car. Neither case was ever solved, but 2 women connected to both of these cases have been unable to move on. Roisin's older sister, Didi O'Halloran, grew up and became a police officer in hopes she'd someday get some answers somehow. And Caitlin Doherty, Roisin's friend at the time and the last person to see her alive, has been aimless and unstable ever since. When Caitlin's estranged mother, Kathleen, dies, she finally has a reason to return to Banakilduff. She's immediately hounded by Didi, who's convinced she holds the key to solving her sister's disappearance. Caitlin and Didi hate each other, but you also get the sense that they're both carrying this immense guilt, and that makes you start to question not just what they knew, but also how involved they were in what happened all those years ago. Now, Darkrooms is a solid thriller, and it has a good plot, but overall I respected what it was trying to do more than I actually connected with the book itself. Darkrooms is a book about cycles of trauma and abuse, and the way that secrets, shame, and violence ripple outward to destroy people's lives. It's also about what twists people into monsters. The themes of the book are handled with sensitivity and compassion. It doesn't shy away from difficult topics, but it also isn't graphic or exploitative either. And the book makes a good effort to center victim stories. Just really wish I'd liked it better. The plot was solid, but the pacing, it's so slow. And overall, there was just nothing original or unique enough to hook me into the characters or the story. It kind of feels like Darkrooms was written to be adapted into a prestige TV series like Mare of Easttown, Sharp Objects, or Big Little Lies. And I've watched all those series. There's things I like about all those series. But if you asked me to pick a favorite character from any of those shows, I think I'd really be at a loss because they're just so focused on characters' flaws and complexities that when they end, you think, man, those people were exhausting. I'm glad that's over. Darkrooms is like that. None of the characters in this book are likable. I guess Caitlin comes the closest. The way she drifts through adulthood, stealing and making destructive choices, it becomes understandable given all the guilt and trauma she's carrying. But Didi, on the other hand, really drained me. She's self-destructive in a way that constantly hurts everyone around her. I just wish the author had given us even one reason to be on her side. But my biggest problem with the book was that the setting felt very underdeveloped and generic. If you think about Mare of Easttown, Sharp Objects, or Big Little Lies, the settings are just so vivid that they become one of the main characters of the story. And one of the reasons I even picked this book up was because it was set in Ireland, and I wanted to feel transported to that place. But other than the fact that the characters were meeting at the pub, they were sprinkling some Irish-sounding phrases into conversations, and there were a few brief references to pagan festivities. Other than that, the book felt like it could have been set in any small town, anywhere in the world. And the Hanging Woods, where Roisin disappeared, they should have felt mystical and foreboding. But the way they were described, they just felt like a small forested area where children like to explore. It was just no big deal. So overall, the book does a good job tackling cycles of trauma and abuse, and it's a solid story. But because it doesn't offer any fresh takes on abuse in small towns, the characters are generally exhausting. I mean, they were a lot. And the setting's just not descriptive or specific enough. I'd have to say this is a pretty average book. I bet if you asked me about Darkrooms in a couple months, I wouldn't remember much about it. And for those reasons, I gave it 3 stars. After starting the month with 2 disappointing thrillers, I had a choice to make. I could cut my losses and switch genres, or I could make my 3rd questionable decision in a row and go for broke with another thriller. What do you think I did? Naturally, I chose questionable decision. But fortunately, this time it actually paid off. My 3rd pick of the month was The Witch's Orchard by Archer Sullivan. Now, this is another debut novel. It is a mystery/thriller, and it came out last August in 2025. This one is so good. It has almost everything I'm looking for in a mystery. Memorable characters, a vivid setting, and a plot that kept me guessing until the very end. And bonus, it's full of really fun witchy folklore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what it's about. In The Witch's Orchard, we meet private investigator Annie Gore. Now, Annie is a former Air Force investigator who became a PI because she is a hopeless snoop and a notorious S-stirrer. But Annie's hit a rough patch. She's running dangerously low on funds when she's hired by an 18-year-old boy named Max, and he's from the tiny Appalachian town of Quartz Creek, North Carolina. Teenage boy is obviously not her typical client, but Max has been haunted for a decade by the disappearance of his little sister. 10 years earlier, 2 young girls vanished from Quartz Creek around the same time. Then, just as mysteriously, one of those girls actually reappeared unharmed, but because of her disability, she was never able to tell anyone who took her or where she'd been. Then not long after that girl returned home, Max's little sister disappeared too, as though one child had been exchanged for another. And if the disappearance of young girls wasn't frightening enough, each time one of them vanished, a primitive apple-head doll was left in her place, like an offering. Creepy. So Max's sister Molly and the other little girl, they're never seen again, and many of the townspeople obviously assume they're long dead. But Max never gave up on finding his sister, which is really sweet. He spent his teen years doing odd jobs and saving enough money to bring in an outsider to take a look at the case. Even though Annie isn't from Quartz Creek, she did grow up in a different small Appalachian town with the same dynamics of secrecy and preservation, so she feels like everything she's experienced has been leading up to this point. And whether she can find the girls or not, she knows she's poking her hornet's nest. Unlike Darkrooms, The Witch's Orchard really brought the Appalachian setting to life. Right after she arrives, Annie meets the screaming crows who notoriously plague the small town. These crows are so haunting that they almost seem supernatural, and we find out that there's even a local story connected to them called The Tale of the Quartz Creek Witch. So Annie asks almost everyone she meets, tell her the story, and it seems like everybody knows a slightly different version. Some versions are much more sinister than others, and in a few, the Quartz Creek Witch is all too real. Oh my God, I am just really obsessed with the way the folktale is told and retold throughout the book with these tiny changes that shift the meaning each time. It is so clever, and it really made the book a lot more memorable. The Witch's Orchard is exactly the kind of mystery I love to get lost in. Between the cold case investigation, the Appalachian folklore, and these tangled relationships in Quartz Creek, I was just completely absorbed. So if you enjoy small-town mysteries with a strong sense of place and a determined protagonist who can't resist stirring up trouble, I think you'll have a great time with this one. Now, the mystery is mostly revealed through interviews, local history, and tall tales. It is not a popcorn thriller with a ton of action, and if it's going to bother you to keep revisiting that tale of the Quartz Creek Witch again and again, then you should probably skip it. But I couldn't get enough of her, and I really enjoyed this one. I know what you're thinking. This was almost my first 5-star read of May 2026. I told you, I'm just so stingy with the 5-star ratings. I don't know why I'm like this. It is very annoying even to me. In order to get 5 stars, a book just has to take my breath away. I need to feel like it's one that I'm going to repeatedly reread in the future and not stop talking about. I want to recommend it to everybody. I just get that 5-star feeling, you know? This book is almost there. I can't even point to a specific thing the book was lacking. It just didn't have that overwhelming 5-star feeling. And some of the other books we're going to talk about in a few minutes did. But now, if it sounds like the kind of story you'd like, I think it's well worth reading. I can't wait for book 2, Brimstone Hollow, which actually comes out August 11, 2026. And it's supposed to continue Annie's story. I have a feeling now that I've gotten to know the main character, I'm going to like book 2 even more. I gave The Witch's Orchard 4.5 stars. I teased some 5-star reads this month in my intro, and I promise they're coming. But before we get to any of them, I have to tell you about the next book I read, which was unfortunately my least favorite book of the month, and in line for worst reads of the year. This was The Witch by Marie Ndiaye. Now, this is partly on me. I went into this book with almost no context. Sometimes when I'm bored, I put the word witch into the Amazon search box and filter for Kindle new releases just to see what bubbles up. So I did that, and obviously the title of this book is The Witch, so that piqued my interest. I liked the cover design with the illustration of mirrored birds, seemed to be on a collision course. So it looks good so far. I open the listing and I see that it was released on April 7th, 2026. It's very recent. So I'm thinking, this is a brand new novel about a powerful witch, and maybe she has bird familiars, or she turns into a bird, something with magic and birds. But I'm not quite sold yet. Then I read one of the first things featured on the Amazon page, which is a quote presumably from a New York Times book review, and it says, "The witch is classic Ndiaye. Taut, spellbinding, and strange, it unfolds with the disturbed logic of a fever dream." Now, I'm not a big fan of fever dream books. I'm a narrative girl. I like some structure. But I don't think I really processed that part of the statement because they had me at taut, spellbinding, and strange. And after reading the title, seeing the cover design, learning it's taut, spellbinding, and strange, I felt like, okay, I've done my due diligence here. This is a me book. That's all the research I did. I got a digital copy from the library, knowing nothing else about it, and I proceeded to have a very disorienting 3 hours. I didn't know, but this book is neither brand new nor a novel. It's actually a new English translation of a 1996 French novella. It's only 144 pages, which is why I finished it, even though I was miserable the whole time reading it. Figured might as well. Also, the translation was shortlisted for the 2026 International Booker Prize. Now, I don't know anything about that award at all, but if I see that honor on another book, I will probably stay clear. This book is really hard for me to talk about. I can only describe it as vague and mildly surreal. Basically, the witch, the title Witch, it's a woman named Lucy who's watching her family and her stability slip through her fingers. Even though she's always been a pretty mediocre witch with minimal abilities, she does what she can to pass her magical lineage onto her twin teenage daughters. But in doing so, they quickly become far more powerful than she ever was. And that power brings independence, so they quickly fly out of the nest. This theme of a mother passing on what she knows only to watch her daughters mature into creatures who no longer need her, that's somewhat poignant. Except that we're in Lucy's head as she's telling us about this, and she just has no emotional response to their empowerment. She kind of flatly wonders if she'll ever see them again. It was strange. So from there, Lucy floats from one interaction to the next. She tries to reunite her divorced parents. I don't think we ever understand why she feels so strongly about that. She tries to get money back from her terrible husband. He sucks. And she stumbles into a new career. She's passive and listless, and her priorities were continuously baffling. I just found this book so meandering and pointless. I certainly wasn't spellbound. I will give it strange. I guess it's taut. I don't know. I think it tackles themes of female agency, capitalism, and motherhood. but it does that in a slippery way that I personally couldn't make sense of or connect to. There just wasn't enough magic or magical realism here to grab me either. So even though it's a quick read, I think it's only worth your time if you like nihilistic surreal French literature or you want people to think that you do. Did not enjoy, 1.5 stars. After finishing The Witch, I had a bad headache, but I looked it up, and the best cure for pretentious, nonsensical book hangovers is finding an incredible book to take your mind off of it. You say that like it's so easy. Oh, never mind. Just make sure the next book you read is more to your taste. The Witch had been longer, and I had stuck with it. I could have been in real danger of entering another reading slump. But I got lucky because someone on BookTube reminded me that May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And while I make a real effort to read books by diverse authors all year round, I'm a sucker for a theme. And I thought it would be a good opportunity or excuse to introduce myself to a new author. So I did a little investigating, and the first book I found that fit that May theme was Chlorine by Jade Song. Chlorine is a body horror coming-of-age novel. It came out in March of 2024. All our narrator, Renyu, has ever wanted is to be a mermaid, a beautiful and powerful monster, free to go where the current takes her. Ever since she was a young girl, she's been enthralled by mermaid folktales and imagery. She especially connects to the darker stories of sirens luring sailors to their watery graves. Ren isn't a mermaid. She's just a human teenage girl, so she settles for becoming a highly competitive swimmer instead. Pushed by her perfectionist Chinese immigrant parents, her demanding coach, and her racist teammates, Ren's life revolves around discipline and performance. Her days are filled with swim practice, calorie restriction, and keeping her grades up so she can get a scholarship to a prestigious university. Every day, she channels her longing to become a mermaid into the chlorine-filled pool. As Ren struggles with puberty, budding queerness, and increasingly tense relationships with the people around her, her fixation on mermaids stops being metaphorical and starts to become all-consuming. She's no longer content to escape into the fantasy world of her girlhood. She wants total transformation, and she's ready to do whatever it takes to transcend the limits of her human form once and for all. And with that in mind, the book builds towards something incredibly daring and grotesque. I'm telling you, my jaw was on the floor. I read Chlorine in 2 days, and I loved every second of it. If you haven't guessed it already, Chlorine was my first 5-star read of May 2026. So good. This book took my breath away again and again. First of all, the writing was luminescent. It just filled my senses. I could practically smell the chlorine. I could feel those slick tiles around the pool under my feet. I could imagine the swimsuit digging into my flesh. It's like I had physical responses to the words on the page, which is really rare. The novel perfectly captures how it feels to be a teenage girl trapped in a body that suddenly feels wrong and ill-fitting. And then that creeping feeling that everybody is watching, judging, and controlling you. As someone prone to fantasy and fairy tales, I knew why Ren needed mermaids and the freedom they offered. I knew it deep in my bones. I have never been an athlete. I did grow up in a competitive academic environment, and it did break my brain a little bit. My name is Dahlia, and I'm a perfectionist. Hi, Dahlia. It's bad, guys. I'm very familiar with that painful combination of the internal and external pressures that you just can't possibly live up to. And this is going to sound really dramatic, maybe a little corny. Feel free to roll your eyes at me. But I think this book was written for all of us unhealed, recovering overachievers, and outsiders who need a character like Ren to make us feel seen. Chlorine reminded me of films like Black Swan or Whiplash, where characters push themselves to the absolute limit in the pursuit of greatness. But this book resonated with me on a much deeper level than those films did. And I've been trying to think about why this book hit me so hard. Maybe because it's about changing teenage female bodies, or the pressure around trying to get into a good school, which are both things I experienced. I don't know. Sometimes art just punches you right in the chest and knocks you out. So I haven't stopped thinking about Ren since I finished this book, and I think she'll probably stay with me for a while. Now, Chlorine isn't a recommendation I would give for everybody. It has elements of horror, but it's really more a coming-of-age story than anything else. So it'll probably resonate most strongly for people who grew up in competitive pressure cookers or routinely felt othered. You really have to be willing to return to the horrors of being a teenager trying to find yourself. And then finally, you need a strong stomach because this book gets intense. But it was the kind of intensity I crave. So again, I gave it 5 stars. Now, I loved Chlorine so much, but it wasn't the horror novel I was expecting. And at this point, I was halfway into the month and I hadn't had one nightmare, so clearly I was doing something wrong. The next book I picked up was The Valley of Vengeful Ghosts by Kim Fu. So Valley of the Vengeful Ghosts just came out in March, and I love the cover. I think it's really striking. Given the title, I thought this was a haunted house story, and I wanted to read about all the ghosties tormenting everyone in the valley. I really should have read the summary more carefully. So the first customer review I'm seeing on the Amazon page is a 5-star review by Catherine, and it starts, quote, "I don't like horror, but I like this book." Well, Catherine, I'm very glad you liked the book, but I think you liked it because this is less horror and it is more existential literary fiction. I describe it as a grief-soaked meditation on how difficult it is to be a person in the modern world. And I think the book does a pretty good job laying out many of the reasons why it's difficult to feel like you're getting out of life alive. But because I'm already grinding through a lot of those reasons on a daily basis, as I'm sure you are too, I prefer to spend my downtime escaping into horror that's less, isn't modern society and capitalism horrific, isn't loneliness the worst, and more, look at the spooky ghosts. So this book is relatively short. It's only 240 pages, but what it lacks in pages, it makes up for in depression. Upon rereading the publisher's summary, I see that the only mention of ghosts is in the sentence, "Haunted by the stories of her clients, a stream of workmen and bureaucrats she can't trust, and visions of ghosts from her past and present, Eleanor's reality unravels, and she's forced to reckon with the secret she's buried and the dark choices she's made." So that summation probably should have clued me into the fact that the ghosts in this book are more specters of grief and less floaty, moany guys who've commandeered the good sheets. The Valley of Vengeful Ghosts tells the story of Eleanor shortly after she's lost her mother to cancer. Even though Eleanor's an adult, she's always been very reliant on her mother to make decisions for her and keep her life running smoothly. You really get the sense that Eleanor would have floated away like a balloon if her mother hadn't kept her tethered. So her mother's final wish was for Eleanor to use her modest inheritance to make a down payment on a home. She's only ever done what her mother has asked her to do. But she's pressured by a pushy realtor to impulsively buy a light-filled model home that's miles from civilization, because it's really the only thing that she can barely afford. Eleanor feels just so sure that she's honored her mother and she's changing her life for the better, but very quickly we realize she's in way over her head. This home was supposed to be part of a big, brand new development, but construction stopped when the sketchy guy running the project ran out of money and options, and he took his own life. The brand new house immediately starts falling apart, and Eleanor starts crumbling under the pressure to get herself back on track. The book is very disorienting. Eleanor is an unreliable narrator. She experiences jarring time jumps. She seems to be hallucinating, or maybe she's just fantasizing, but she cannot get out of her own way. I had empathy for her, but it was difficult because she spent the book avoiding taking responsibility for any of her choices or actions. It was never her fault. So unfortunately, Valley of the Vengeful Ghosts wasn't for me. If you've been feeling too happy lately and you're just looking for something to bring you back down, I definitely think you should give this one a go. No, I'm being mean. I think if you're going through something really difficult and you want to feel less alone, or you like stories about encroaching insanity and loss of control, this might resonate for you. But if you're looking for a haunted house or a traditional horror book, I would give this a pass. I gave The Valley of the Vengeful Ghosts 2 stars. I've been telling you about all the novels I read throughout May in the order that I read them. But before I tell you about the other fiction books I've been reading, I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to combine the 2 nonfiction books I finished this month because they're about the same subject. Janis Joplin. I know many of you know who Janis Joplin is, but in case any of you watching don't, Janis was an American singer who became world famous in the 1960s for her distinctive voice and passionate live performances. Her best-known songs are Piece of My Heart and Me and Bobby McGee. Janis exercised her demons on stage with her sultry combination of blues and rock and her raw and powerful vocals. There was just no one like her. She's such an icon. She tragically died of a heroin overdose in 1970 when she was only 27 years old. I'm so fascinated by Janis. I've been looking into her astrology, which is pretty remarkable too. Now, whenever I'm studying somebody's charts, I like to correlate what I'm seeing with their life experiences. So to learn more about those experiences, I read 2 biographies this month about Janis, and the first one was titled Janis, Her Life and Music. And it was written by music journalist and biographer Holly George Warren. It's a 2019 book, and it gives a ton of background information about Janis's upbringing in a conservative suburb of Texas and how she wrestled throughout her life with the competing urges to conform or follow her wild heart. She was ambitious, but fragile, and undeniably talented, but not in the ways it was acceptable for women to be talented or seen at the time. Janis, the biography, was exceptionally well researched. It seems that the author interviewed as many people who knew her as she could find. She went through all the archives. I thought the book was fair and balanced. It presented Janis's addiction as a disease. It showed how much she struggled in all of her personal relationships with her family, her boyfriends and girlfriends, and her coworkers. So I learned a ton about her life. This is the tough part. Even though the biography has 4.7 stars on Amazon with almost 1,200 ratings, I didn't love it. I thought it was a little dry and encyclopedic. It felt like if you wanted to know what Janis had for breakfast on a December morning in 1955, you could probably find it in this book. I'm exaggerating, I made that up, but the book is dense. I read it over about 3 weeks, and I had to psych myself up to keep picking it up each time because it was so dense. For me, the problem is it's missing that raw, messy, creative heart that is the essence of Janis. It describes that heart here and there, it hints at it, but I didn't feel it. So after I finished the book, I had a great foundation of the chronology of Janis's life, and her brief life was remarkable in so many ways. But I didn't feel closer to knowing Janis. I don't think it's the biography she would have wanted somehow. Does that make sense? It was too organized and sanitized. So I was a little disappointed because it seems like I had a different experience reading the book than a lot of other reviewers did again. But I finished it and I wanted more. So I picked up Buried Alive, the biography of Janis Joplin by Myra Friedman. I read the 2011 edition of this book, which is a little bit different than the original 1973 edition. It has some great updates, but it doesn't contain some of the original letters that were in the first edition because the estate would not give permission. Unlike Holly George Warren, who has a long career as a writer and has published 16 books on a variety of mostly music-themed subjects, Myra's only written this one book. And she wrote it because she was Janis's publicist and close friend, and she wanted to make sure Janis was remembered. Now, I know, books written by people who know the subject, they're often less objective. They can have dubious motives. Sometimes they're too positive, but sometimes they're too negative. I thought this one was really well done. Myra only knew Janis toward the end of her life, but she didn't just include her own recollections. She also interviewed a lot of the other people who knew Janis. She probably had more access to them because of their relationship. Where Buried Alive shines is in creating a psychological portrait of Janis as a complicated and damaged individual. In some of the anecdotes, she's completely endearing, and in others, she's a needy monster hurting everyone around her. This book is so much messier and personal than the other one I read. Myra's not a seasoned writer. A lot of the writing seems conversational and informal, like she's dishing on her experiences with her good friend. So there's real intimacy to it. It has more of a fly on the wall feel. We're backstage, we're at the bars with Janis, surrounded by admirers and enablers. You see how in denial so many of the people around her were, especially because she just wasn't alone in the drinking and the drug use that led to her eventual downfall. And you just feel how badly she wanted her music career to fill this gaping hole inside of her, made her feel like she was never enough. So I had a much better time reading this second biography because it was more raw and complex, like her art. But then again, at times I felt like I only understood the events that were happening in this book because I'd read the other book first. If there was a way to combine the straightforward reporting of the first book and the deeper exploration of the second book, I think it would be perfect. As it is, if you are interested in Janis, I do recommend both of these biographies. I don't know if I would have been more confused if I'd read Buried Alive first, but I might have been. I think Janis gives the best chronological foundation, and Buried Alive captures Janis's personality and soul better. So I'm glad I read both of them. I gave Janis 3.5 stars and Buried Alive 4 stars. You know that feeling when you're standing in front of a closet full of clothes, but you don't want to wear any of them? I don't usually have that problem with my closet because everything in it is black, but I do have that problem with my Kindle. I'm not going to tell you how many unread books I have on that thing because I am embarrassed. It is really bad. And I can't wait to read every single book that's on there, except that sometimes I just don't want to. I scroll through and I just feel repulsed by the bounty that past tense Dahlia has provided for me. I don't know what's wrong, but sometimes it's just nothing appealing. When this happens, my solution is to go on the Libby app and browse through skip the line titles until something grabs me. Watching this, you're probably a reader, so you probably know all about Libby. But for anybody who doesn't know, Libby's an app. It lets you link up your local library card and borrow digital copies of books that you can read on your e-reader. And I think it is the best thing that has ever happened to anyone in the history of mankind. I use it all the time. And I love the skip the line feature because it gives you immediate access to popular new releases with long wait lists for a shorter borrowing window of just a week. This is instant gratification without the investment of actually purchasing the book. I just finished Valley of Vengeful Ghosts, and I needed a serious pick-me-up. That book was a downer. When I saw Murder Bimbo by Rebecca Novack among the skip the line titles, I laughed out loud. I don't know why, but that title is so funny to me. So I skimmed the summary very briefly. Again, I know, I need to stop doing that. It's gotten me into trouble this month with Valley of Vengeful Ghosts and The Witch. I don't know why I can focus on the text in a book for hours on end, but then I have no attention span for a 4-paragraph book description. Please tell me in the comments if you have this problem too. Anyway, I skimmed the summary. I saw the word murder several times. That's enough. I went for it. And I'm so glad I did because Murder Bimbo is my second 5-star book of May 2026. I had the best time reading this book. The plot and the main character are gloriously demented. Murder Bimbo tells the story of Murder Bimbo. She's an experienced sex worker, and she's recruited by government agents to assassinate a political extremist codenamed Meatneck. Meatneck is known to pay for sex, and a sex worker probably has the best odds of gaining access to him when he's at his most vulnerable. The idea of a sex worker becoming an assassin sounds implausible. Brace yourself, because it quickly becomes apparent that Murder Bimbo's narcissism, delusions of grandeur, and disinterest in sweating the small stuff are the reasons she got the job in the first place. As a reader, I'm thinking, really? I don't know. But Murder Bimbo has no problem believing she could be plucked from obscurity for a top-secret mission with huge political implications. When we're first introduced to her, the assassination's already happened. She's on the run, and she's hiding out in an unnamed location. At this point, she's realized that she both knows too much and can be easily disposed of, so she is in fear for her life. But then she has a genius idea to reach out to a popular true crime podcast called Justice for Bimbos to get her story out there and possibly save her own life. She writes, "Here's your chance to catch me before I become a scapegoat, a punching bag, or a monster who needs reputation restitution. Please, please, please turn me into a feminist anti-hero." Through a series of bonkers and often hilarious emails, we learn how she got in over her head and why she's so afraid now. But just when we think we know the whole story, Murder Bimbo stops emailing the podcaster and starts emailing her ex-girlfriend instead. And the story she tells her ex, it's a little bit different than the story she wanted the world to hear. The book's divided into 3 parts, and in each part, Murder Bimbo tells us a different version of the story. This was so clever. It really makes you think about the nature of truth, the media, power dynamics, sex work, our current political hellscape, just so many topical issues. Now, I flew through this book in a day, and I had a complete blast. I loved every twisted layer. But I feel I should point out it is getting really mixed reviews. I kind of get it. I can see why it wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea. But it's brilliant, and if you don't like it, you're wrong. I don't mean that. So let me tell you a little bit more about it so you can decide if this is something that you would like. First of all, this book is not a slasher. I know the cover kind of looks slashery. If you go into it expecting or wanting a slasher, you're going to be very disappointed. Not a slasher. Secondly, as I already said, the book tells the same story in great detail, 3 different times. It doesn't do that to be repetitive and annoying. It does that to show us how easily we can be manipulated into seeing the same so-called facts in different lights, depending on why someone is telling us something. What are they hoping to gain? Sympathy? Understanding? Power? Love? Something else? So if it's going to drive you nuts to keep rehashing the same events over and over, this book isn't for you. I will happily listen to 10 different podcasts about the same case. I will read 2 biographies in 1 month about the same person. And I'm trying to look for subtle differences that give me more insight. So this repetition was no problem for me. In fact, I relished it. But if it sounds tedious to you, skip it. And then thirdly, it's meant to be satire. It's humorous and exaggerated. And a lot of the language draws from podcasts and social media influences. If you're not in those worlds, you might feel lost or irritated. I loved the main character, Murder Bimbo, but she has very unlikable traits that I think are supposed to illustrate how much main character energy so many people in our society have right now. She's a mirror for our worst impulses. You should go in knowing the author is asking you to root for a demented anti-heroine. I'm really not trying to talk you out of picking Murder Bimbo up. I think it's easily going to be one of my favorite reads of the entire year. I loved it so much, but I'm trying to prepare you a little for the wild ride you're in for so you can make an informed decision about whether or not the book is for you. Overall, I would recommend this book for news and true crime junkies with a very dark sense of humor and secret criminal impulses. Again, I gave Murder Bimbo 5 stars. After Murder Bimbo, I was on a Libby Skip-the-Line high, so I was thrilled to get a skip-the-line copy of a book I already had on hold but thought I wouldn't get for months because so many people wanted it. Dissection of a Murder by Joe Murray. Dissection of a Murder just came out on May 5th, 2026, and most early readers are raving about it. And I have to tell you, it is that good. I'm not even going to try to keep you in suspense. Dissection of a Murder by Joe Murray is my 3rd 5-star read. Okay. It's another book I read in just 1 day. I could not put this down. If you're into legal thrillers and you can set aside a day to bed rot and just devour it, do it. Because once you start, you're probably not going to want to put it down either. Dissection of a Murder is about a young female barrister named Layla Reynolds. For anybody who doesn't know, barristers are lawyers mainly in the UK, and they specialize in courtroom advocacy and litigation. In other words, they argue cases in court in front of judges and juries. So, okay, Layla's a barrister, and she's been working very hard to prove herself when she gets her first murder case. It's not just any murder case. The victim's a judge, so it is very high profile. Judge is found bludgeoned to death in an apartment, and police immediately arrest the guy Jack Miller who lives there, and they even find the murder weapon at the scene. It looks pretty bad for Jack. Layla knew the judge. Everybody she works with knew the judge too, and they are all out for blood. Layla feels completely unqualified to take this on, but the accused specifically asked for her. Unlike most barristers, she came from a disadvantaged background, and Jack feels sure that she'll advocate for him. Then she goes to see him in jail, and he won't talk to her. He completely clams up. And to make matters even worse, the prosecutor assigned to the case turns out to be Layla's older, much more experienced barrister husband, Julian. Julian has an exceptional trial record, and as her mentor, he taught her everything she knows. It's like they share the same playbook. So now Layla's in this pressure cooker where her client is pleading not guilty, but he won't tell her how or why he's not guilty. Everybody she works with is rooting for her to fail, and her marriage is on the line. That's all I'm going to tell you about the plot, because the fun of the book is just taking the ride. It's tense. It's surprising. I was rooting for Layla the whole time because she's a very believable character with a rich inner world and backstory. I could just keep gushing about this book. I think you get the point. And it's getting so many rave reviews on BookTube that it's probably in danger of being overhyped. So the next wave of readers might be disappointed. I'm really sorry if me liking this book so much is making it harder for you to like it in the future. But I'm really excited to tell you about it because I thought it was a really great read. Everybody's saying this too. I'm going to say it. I can't believe this thriller was written by a debut author. What's really cool is just like the main character Layla, Jo Murray came from an underprivileged background, and she worked as a criminal barrister before leaving her law career to raise her kids and hopefully write a huge pile of legal thrillers. I don't know a lot about the legal system in England, but every time I felt confusion or doubt, Jo clearly explained what was happening in the courtroom and behind the scenes, and I felt really taken care of as a reader. The story is so good that it's been picked up to be adapted for season 2 of Apple TV's show, Presumed Innocent. You know a book by a debut author has to be pretty special for a prestige streamer to invest in bringing it to the screen. I had the best time reading this though, so even though I am curious to see how they adapt it, I'm really glad I read it first. I read a digital copy, but I heard the audiobook is excellent if you'd rather listen to it. I'm tempted to check that out later this year and see if I pick up on clues I missed the first time around. I would recommend this book to thriller readers who enjoy a tense mystery where everybody's keeping secrets and the stakes keep getting higher. I tend to read more police procedurals than courtroom dramas, but this book has me thinking that I need to seek out some more legal thrillers this year. So if you have any to recommend, please let me know in the comments. And if you read Dissection of a Murder, tell me what you thought of that too. 2 5-star reads in a row? I love it! When I was thinking about adding book review videos to my channel, I really thought about how to clearly communicate the kinds of books I like to read to you. I'm definitely a mixed genre reader, so I didn't want to say, come to my channel for all your horror book recommendations, because there are months like this one where I accidentally don't read a single straight horror title. So after giving it some thought, I figured out that the most common themes in the books that I choose to read are magic, mayhem, and murder. So you can imagine my surprise and delight when I was browsing upcoming titles on NetGalley. This is a site that provides advanced reader copies to reviewers, and I found a book called Magic City Mayhem by Marcus X. Figueroa, with a robed skeleton and a man carrying a cup of coffee and a sword standing in a salt circle on the cover. Not only do I like skeletons, coffees, and swords, but that's 2 of my favorite things to read about right there in the title, magic and mayhem. And then after reading this book, I can confirm that the third theme, murder, makes a few appearances too. Like so many of the books I read this month, Magic City Mayhem is also a debut novel. It's coming out on June 23rd, 2026. And if you like morally dubious characters with access to magic, mayhem-causing monsters, and necromancy used to question murder victims, you should definitely check this one out. The novel opens with an article that tells us that 20 years earlier in Miami, Florida, all of the dead spontaneously rose from their graves and made a quick run to Home Depot for construction supplies that they paid for with sunken treasure. The zombie crew uses those materials to build the College of Practical Arts and then retreats back to their eternal resting places. Right from those opening pages, I am locked in. I'm immediately hooked, and I'm so excited for whatever's coming next. The College of Practical Arts is a department of magical studies at the Florida International University of Miami. Don't let the school setting put you off. We do spend a little time there, but most of the story takes place around Miami, and the characters are all adults. I definitely wouldn't put this in a dark academia or a wizarding school category. So Magic City Mayhem tells the story of Pablo Diaz, a necromancer and one of the most popular professors at the College of Practical Arts. Even though he's a powerful wizard, life is not going smoothly for Pablo. He has some very relatable mundane problems. Nothing he does makes his Cuban-born father proud of him, and he's burdened with a staggering amount of medical debt. His necromantic skills are in high demand, so he could leave academia and take a more lucrative job in the private sector. But he genuinely loves teaching, and he feels that he owes it to his boss and mentor, that's that walking robed skeleton we saw on the book's cover, to stay. So instead, Pablo starts dabbling in side hustles. And wouldn't you know it, the local friendly Russian mob sees values in this ability to locate people and question the dead. So like anyone juggling multiple jobs, Pablo's becoming increasingly sleep-deprived, and he starts to make some questionable decisions. But because he's a powerful wizard, when Pablo slips up, it quickly spirals out of control and seems to set Miami on a path towards total destruction. Suddenly, all manner of dangerous magical creatures, from bloodthirsty orcs to a fire-breathing dragon, are ravaging the city he loves. And if that wasn't bad enough, he's also wanted for questioning related to that unfortunate side hustle with the mob. As the air crackles with increasing magic and the boundaries between dimensions thin, Pablo needs to get his priorities straight and determine what he's willing to sacrifice to save Magic City from the mayhem he's helped unleash. This was such a refreshing take on urban fantasy. I complained earlier in this video about another book that felt like it could be set in just any small town anywhere in the world. Well, this book oozed Miami from every page. You could just tell it was written by someone who had experienced life there. It's full of a really diverse cast of characters, and it has a lot of Spanish dialogue between Pablo and his father, but all the dialogue's translated into English, so it feels very inclusive. And there are lots of mouth-watering descriptions of food and drink that you would find around Miami. At the same time that the real world feels like you're really there, the magical aspects of the world are also richly detailed. Anyone who studied witchcraft will recognize the foundations of magic in this world. And Pablo's courses sounded amazing. Something else that's really cool is that modern technologies are woven into the story in surprising ways. I swear I'm looking at my cell phone a little differently after reading this book. Figueroa draws from familiar characters of fantasy and mythology like mermaids and gremlins, and then turns them slightly on their head so that the world felt so easy to visualize, but the story still felt wildly original and unexpected. I truly loved this book, and I'm dying for more of this world in the future. So at this point in the video, you're probably thinking, 5-star read, 5-star read. And I wish. This book was so close, and I'm actually agonizing over what to rate it because it's so creative. I cared about Pablo. I loved how magic, mythical monsters, and technology were woven into the story. There's just so much I love about this book. But there are 3 things that are keeping me from giving it a 5-star rating. Uneven pacing, an often cavalier disregard for human lives, and a confusing ending. This book kept giving me whiplash. It has a ton of action and battle scenes, and those scenes barrel forward at 200 miles an hour. But then the author slams on the brakes and takes us into the past to provide more context about a character in the scene. I just wish there was a more steady progression where we were introduced to the main characters and then the action started to build, instead of a series of flashback, emergency, one after the other. Would have been less jarring to read, and I think it would have had more emotional impact because these huge things were happening to characters that we'd only known for like 10 pages, and I didn't have enough time to care about them. Continuing on that theme of action scenes. I'm just gonna say I'm not an action girl. It's my least favorite genre to see at the movies. I don't like all those superhero movies. I'm also not a gamer. If you're into action movies and video games, there's a good chance you'll really get into these parts of the book because they're very tense, fast-paced, and suspenseful sequences. But even though this is my least favorite type of mayhem, I'm just so glad I stuck with the book because it was very entertaining. However, it still bothered me that as Pablo grapples with emergency after emergency, a lot of faceless bystanders lose their lives. I'm just really uncomfortable with these types of action sequences where people are mowed down with relatively little reflection on that grim cost. I'm going to say the author did try. He did sometimes let the narrator feel something for the cost of the lives that they were losing. It just wasn't enough for me. It still felt like there was just a lot of faceless deaths. I know the human toll keeps the stakes high, but I prefer more value placed on the lives of even fictional people. And you can come after me, I know. I read a ton of books about murder. I read true crime, I read thrillers. So maybe it seems like I'm contradicting myself or I don't have a leg to stand on here. I'm just going to say that I see a difference between a story that has a victim or a couple of victims and there's a justice component, and a story with dozens of human casualties where the loss of life seems quickly forgotten. Again, the story has enough other stuff going for it, with some really great characters and an interesting plot, and I highly recommend it. But be aware, there's a lot of action and a lot of carnage, and if that's going to completely turn you off, you might want to pick something else to read. And then finally, because the book was moving so quickly, sometimes I found it confusing. And the part I found the most confusing was unfortunately the ending. I think I know what happened. I'm pretty sure. But even after reading it and then rereading it 2 more times, I still have questions. I think the ending just needed more breathing room and more detail. But I loved the book. And again, it's a debut novel. So I'm sure if the author keeps writing, his pacing and clarity will hopefully keep getting better. If you're a chaos demon, or a reader looking for a fast-paced urban fantasy with witchcraft, morally dubious characters, and gremlins whose idea of a good time is gleefully dismantling a server room, then you should pick up Magic City Mayhem at the end of June. I gave Magic City Mayhem 4.5 stars. To finish the month, I read one more NetGalley arc. This one's coming out on August 11th, and it's called Joan of the Arcane. I love this cover art with the esoteric line drawings layered over the introspective woman who just looks lost in her own world. I think it's a really beautiful cover. Joan of the Arcane, written by Alexandra, I don't know if it's Flater or Fleeter, Fleder, follows Joan. The book follows Joan. She's a former, nearly famous punk rock singer, and she turned in her safety pins and leather boots for diapers and athleisure when she became pregnant and settled down as a Los Angeles housewife. With her kids grown and off to college, Joan finds herself in the throes of a midlife crisis. She misses the excitement of her younger years and resents how sanitized and dull her life has become. Looking for answers, she embarks on a journey of self-discovery that has her obsessively watching online conspiracy theory videos and turning to rituals in a dark goddess witchcraft book that promises personal transformation. Joan's had an awakening, but her newfound power is alienating everyone around her. Then her very square realtor husband sells a house in the neighborhood to a man Joan recognizes from one of those conspiracy videos that she's been compulsively watching. She is positive he's a former astronaut who was supposed to have died decades earlier in a famous space mission gone wrong. When Joan meets a kindred spirit at a local coffee shop, the two of them become determined to uncover the truth behind their mysterious new neighbor and his connections to a sinister government cover-up. At its heart, this book's really a character study about what it takes to find meaning and self-acceptance in this modern age. And I liked that part of it a lot. It's easy to relate to the way that Joan felt at sea when she's going through this huge life transition without the support she probably needed from her loved ones. But what I really struggled with was understanding if I was supposed to be laughing at Joan for being pathetic and ridiculous or empathizing with her. I'm just not sure which parts of the book were meant to be humor or satire and which parts were meant to be taken as sincere. From the first few pages of the book, I intensely dislike Joan. She's judgmental, she's self-absorbed, she expects the people around her to listen to her and give her grace, but she's unable to extend that courtesy to anyone else. Most of the time, she approaches life as though it's her against the world, and she barrels into situations without considering the consequences. Now, I know I have a lot in common with Joan. We're both women living in Los Angeles who are open to alternative approaches to life. But I actually found myself sympathizing a lot more with the characters around her, especially Joan's husband and the neighbor she's convinced is hiding his true identity. I gotta tell you, it's not often I find myself saying those poor men. And believe me, I do not enjoy. That's not how I want to be feeling. Joan's husband is portrayed as boring and out of touch, as though these are the absolute worst things you can possibly be. Even though it's clear that he loves his family, he enjoys helping other people, and he's rightfully concerned about these serious personality changes his wife is going through and her obsession with alt media. Okay, he's not emotionally intelligent and he lets his mother bully Joan. It's not like I'm giving him Book Husband of the Year award. Not a thing anyway, but if it was, he can't have it. But I think the book does him dirty by positioning him as the main obstacle to Joan's awakening. To me, Joan's problem in this story is Joan. Instead of doing real work on herself, she's looking for answers down dangerous internet rabbit holes. Book does a good job exploring the interconnectedness between spirituality, wellness, and conspiracy theory culture, and how engaging with any one of those channels makes you vulnerable to the other two. But I don't know what side the book actually comes down on. Joan goes down dangerous paths, but that ultimately leads to her growth. So is the book then giving a thumbs up to Joan's choices? I truly don't know. And I had the same mixed feelings about Joan's relationship to witchcraft. As a genuine practitioner, there were moments in the book where I felt like the author was making fun of things that are important to me. The ritual work Joan does is surprisingly detailed and shows that the author is definitely familiar with modern witchcraft. But I often read these scenes as, look at this silly woman who thinks that drinking a preparation of herbal tea and saying an incantation will connect her to goddess. And I don't know if I was reading this correctly, because after I finished the book, I looked up the author, and her tiny bio on her website calls her a poet, herbalist, oracle, and sometimes a fairy teller. So I would expect someone who describes herself that way to share a lot of my beliefs. Now I'm thinking maybe those long ritual scenes were meant to be taken differently. Ultimately, I just don't know what to make of this book. I will say that my favorite part was the female friendship Joan has with the woman she meets in the cafe, Selena. Their relationship is maybe supposed to serve as a cautionary tale about toxic friendships that enable your worst impulses, but I found it really charming. I found myself wishing I had a similar partner in crime who would drop what they're doing to root through a stranger's trash with me, no questions asked. So overall, I just have mixed feelings about this one. Kept me engaged. I actually had a surprisingly emotional response to some section towards the end of the book. Like, I was touched. So I am glad that I read it. But my dislike for Joan, my inability to decide if the book was satire or sincere, and my lingering uncertainty about what the novel was trying to say made this a somewhat frustrating read. If you're trying to decide if Joan of the Arcane is worth reading, I would recommend it to you if you like tense and mysterious character studies with ambiguous narratives. So this one, it's mostly about character development. There's very little plot. The conspiracies, witchcraft, and the mystery seem to me to be vehicles to explore questions of identity and purpose. If you're comfortable diving into a strange, nebulous story with a complicated heroine, give it a try. I just don't think it totally worked for me, so I gave Joan of the Arcane 3.5 stars. And that's all the books I finished in May. Overall, my average rating this month was 3.63 stars. But the real headline is that somehow 3 debut novels managed to sneak past my dragon-like defenses and earn the coveted 5 stars. The Misadventures of Wren from Chlorine, Murder Bimbo from Murder Bimbo, and Layla from Dissection of a Murder are all gonna stick with me for a long time. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'd really love to hear from you. Have you read any of the books I talked about? Or do you plan to? And what was your last 5-star read? Leave it in the comments below because I'm always hunting for my next literary obsession. If you don't have anything to say, but you feel like saying hi, leave me a little mermaid emoji for Chlorine. So I'm filming this on the 2nd day of June, so here's to another month of making questionable reading decisions and occasionally being rewarded for them. And happy Pride. Until next time, be well and be witchcrafting.